An increase in which of the following would cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the left? So this question, we're told that to identify which of the following options, if increased, would cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the left. So to answer this question, let's first draw out the aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply curves. So for this curve, the y-axis represents the price level, and the x-axis represents the real GDP. And for the curves, the downward sloping curve represents the aggregate demand, and the upward sloping curve represents the short-run aggregate supply. So let's first consider option choice A, consumer optimism. So an increase in consumer optimism means that consumers are optimistic about the future and that the economy looks good. Therefore, they would increase their consumption. An increase in consumption means that the aggregate demand would increase, and this increase in aggregate demand would mean the curve would shift to the right. But this is incorrect then, because we're looking for the option that would cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the left, not to the right. Therefore, A is incorrect, because an increase in consumer optimism leads to a shift to the right in the aggregate demand curve. B, population. This is incorrect because population does not influence the aggregate demand curve. The aggregate demand curve is influenced only by consumption spending, plus investment spending, plus government expenditures, plus net exports. Because population does not fall into any of these categories, we can eliminate option choice B. C, cost of resources. This is incorrect because an increase in the cost of resources would shift the short-run aggregate supply curve, not the aggregate demand curve. So C is incorrect. D, income taxes. This seems to be the correct answer because an increase in income taxes means that consumers have less money to spend. Because they have less money to spend, the consumer spending will decrease. And because aggregate demand is proportional to the following four factors, the decrease in consumer spending means there's a decrease in aggregate demand. And thus, this will lead to a shift to the left of the aggregate demand curve. So therefore, D, an increase in income taxes, seems to be the correct answer. E, net exports. This is incorrect because an increase in net exports means that the aggregate demand would increase, and an increase in aggregate demand means a shift to the right of the aggregate demand curve. And this is not what we're looking for, so E must be incorrect. And thus, we're left with D as the correct answer.